Hey, what's up guys? This is Brian at WhisperStatus74. Welcome to the community, welcome to the channel. If this is the first time you are seeing me, please consider liking and subscribing. We are real tech for real people. Today is an LG CX game mode settings video. I don't do settings video or calibration videos much because they're a personal thing on what you like versus what someone else might like. They're also not calibration settings, as you cannot calibrate a display without equipment. So settings videos themselves are something that I tend not to do. It's something a lot of you guys want. But what I do want to do is go through a different setup, which is very important for the LG CX. I first want to apologize that I'm about 3 videos behind in regards to responding to the comments. I typically respond within a day or so, but I received the 77 LG CX, which is behind me. You can tell how large it is. But what I wanted to, you can see it literally is humongous, but what I wanted to do was just talk about some of the pitfalls quickly of this panel. So getting the CX initially, I had some pretty serious banding on 5% gray. It was noticeable in menus. Pixel refresh has helped it. I have to put about 100 hours to have it clean up a little bit more, but I'm not worried. I have plenty of time to do that. There's no return that I need to do or anything. I'm pretty much covered with it. But what I will say though is this panel took an update at the factory. My LG CX, which is underneath me over here, is 55 inches, didn't have the update. So out of the box, that CX did much better with the Xbox, the PC, and the PS4 Pro. For some reason with this update, it looked extremely washed out. I mean, pretty washed out, and I was not happy with the level of detail. It looked dull, it looked washed out, as I mentioned, and very un-OLED-like. So, talking to brass tacks, I brought my boy up in the video the other day, who is a very good friend in the UK, also has his own YouTube channel. Please check him out. He has the same TV, but he's about four updates ahead of me. And we were talking about the blacks, and I said to him, I said, look man, I'm just not feeling it. There's no pop at all in the image. On the A9S Master Series OLED, which I have over here, you know, out of the box, it looks amazing. I don't know what's going on. And he said, did you go through the Xbox calibration settings? And I said, no, it wasn't really needed for the 55 inch. But even though the 55 inch just took the update, there's still some elevated blacks. There is some issues with a weird dithering with Gears of War 4 that the Sony A9S doesn't have, that he doesn't have anymore with his new update. So updates have fixed it, which I hate updates having to change picture quality, but I digress. So him and I are on the phone today. He's in the UK, he's 5 hours ahead, and we're just going through the settings together. And what we found, or at least what I found with his help, was not the Xbox calibration, the 4K calibration settings. Many of you guys know that in the menu. It helps you get your panel in line. You go through all the 4K details, make sure your panel's okay. I found that by putting, I'll go through this when we get behind the camera. But what I found was, it wasn't the 4K detail calibration, it was the HDR calibration that actually made a big difference. And what that did was, by setting, my point being that it just seemed like on other panels it was fine. Whether it was the TCL, whether it was the A9S, or even the CX before this update, it didn't seem to make a big difference to go into those settings. It made a huge difference, night and day, with the LG CX. Now for me, it looks like an OLED. It has the detail, it has the pop. For a little bit there, it didn't have the blacks, it didn't have the detail, it just didn't have, you know, basically any of it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the game settings that I'm currently using as of now, but more importantly, we're going to go through the HDR settings in the Xbox, which some of you guys don't know are even there. And like I said, I didn't have much use for those settings until I got the CX. Many of you guys have the CX, you're having issues with the picture. This definitely has made a difference, and not only has it made a difference, is it's made a difference in terms of whatever banding I thought I was seeing. With OLEDs, if there's any kind of banding and you have elevated blacks, that banding is going to be visible. Without the elevated blacks, they're nearly impossible to see. I've had several OLEDs around. I've never noticed any banding problems. With the 77-inch, I did, but going through these steps and even restarting the Xbox has made the picture quality night and day. And I'll run through a few demos. The demos I use here, or the games I use here, are fairly cheap that you can either buy or use on Xbox Game Pass. We're going to be going through Gears of War 4, and also we're going to do the Forza Horizon demo. I won't be filming those in HDR. You'll see them. You'll see how they look here, but you'll see how good they look now and how much depth there is. Now, when it comes to OLED, by the way, we always hear about crushed blacks and the image perhaps being too dark. But what's so important is without that contrast ratio, they are very dim. With the contrast ratio, with the dark blacks, then the HDR pops. But if you have the elevated blacks, then OLEDs don't matter at all. They actually are absolutely useless. Without that black level, they're just not very bright panels. You get that black level back and they're absolutely stunning, and then the detail comes back. So we're going to go through 3 demos. The 3 demos, I said 2. We're going to do Forza Horizon 4. We'll show you this part of Gears 4, and then we're going to do Gears 5. And these are demos I showed you on the A9S, and now with the CX they look equally as good, even though it still needs a few updates. So let's go through that. We're 7 minutes in, and we'll go through the settings pretty quickly. But I don't know. I'm very pleased with this image now, but for the week I was so distracted as the CX, just as it took that update on both of my panels, they snuck it on the other one. It changed the picture quality drastically, and hopefully with the Xbox, we'll do one for the PS4 as well. Hopefully this actually helps you guys. Alright guys, here we are behind the camera. This is Gears 4, and what's interesting is having a display this large, you really do have to step back, and the camera has to be rather far away. Now I have it a little bit darker, so the blacks are not going to be, they're going to be a little bit more on the crush side, but the vibrancy is amazing. And it does make that detail pop in just about everything you see. Now quickly, what I want to show you guys though is in regards to the settings. We'll stay on the Xbox menu for a second. We're going to go over to the LG settings, which again, I can't fit all the way in frame. And the settings that I want to start with quickly are all settings. You want to make sure that you don't have to be in game mode. I know a lot of people have battles with this. Game mode is completely up to you. However, where I found was I had the aspect ratio in original, as it's intended, and I had just scan as automatic. Which what that does, and I'll show you that in a second, in the 4K calibration, you can see that it actually takes away the green line. So, especially on a display that size, you don't want the display zoomed in at all. So even though I had it in original, which is fine, but having the aspect ratio in auto for just scan, it's already going to distort the image, and it may add some softness or distortion. I didn't notice it with the HUDs, but you can see that it definitely is, the arrow is off the screen. So that's the first one to make sure you go in and change right off the bat. So heading back into the LG settings, you are in game. You go down to additional settings. Make sure, well, I should say this one first. Make sure your deep color is enabled, HDR. Instant game response needs to be enabled to enable HDR, at least, to get this all working together. AMD FreeSync Premium, I've toggled this on and off. It's not crushing. It is, I shouldn't say it's not crushing anything. I should say that there's still that dithering, but I thought this was the culprit. I just left it on. But you know, I have variable refresh rate enabled in the Xbox. So heading back to what I was saying before, an aspect ratio. You can watch the Xbox on the right going into just on, brings it back. Now you can see the line is just slightly visible in the corners, but it does change the way it looks. Watch the arrow again. And then if we really wanted to, we can actually go in here and hit 16:9. And look at that, even makes it, oh, I'm sorry, do that again, go back into on, and that should make us perfect. And what's funny is I've seen this with OLEDs on PC. It does seem to cut the corners off a little bit. You can actually see it. The green screen is there, and it's kind of missing there a little. Oh, sorry. Missing there a little bit. So they don't quite scale as they should, but that's the first thing that I would make sure to go in and change. You also get to the settings by just hitting the gear button down. Aspect ratio. So for me, I'm better at original. Isn't that weird though? You can actually see it on one side and not the other. So to figure that out. And then we are going to go back to just scan being on. So that's the first thing that you want to change. In picture settings, we're going to go over that in a second, but I do want to show you as we get out of this, this calibration menu, which a lot of us have used forever. Now the banding you see on the screen, some of that is there, some of it's not. Some of the camera makes it look worse, but TV's breaking in. When you go through these, brightness, contrast. I used to use these prior to really using HDR all that much. And you were going in and changing the actual brightness of your TV, which a lot of us, we're not going to do when we're in HDR. So I don't mess with this a whole lot and never found this to be very useful, especially with an OLED. And it would kind of crush things or make things too bright or too whatever. So this is not the one I want you to get into. The one I want you to go into, again, this is the what, Brass Tacks and I went through together. Make sure everything's checked. Dolby Vision will disable with AMD's FreeSync Premium. If you want to see Dolby Vision checked here again, if you're using it as a player, you're going to want to hit, allow Dolby Vision, or if you're sharing the same port. But hitting back into our settings. Now for me, the 4K details, 50 Hertz isn't supported here. I've done this in so long. Here it is. So calibration for HDR games. A lot of us have jumped over this. Now, when you see this, you hit next. This is, to me, what made the big difference. Changing panels, changing so many different TVs, LEDs in here, OLEDs in here. The Sony didn't need this, but the CX definitely benefited from this step. So again, to find this, you can actually see it. It should be on your home menu as well, but it's very easy to say calibrate games and then go over to exit or TV setup, right? So here we are at next. People go right here, TV setup, and it takes you to this menu, and you're like, okay, what do I do now? Then you hit next and next, and it just gives you tips. You don't want that, so you want to just go back. For many of you, this is just rudimentary. Instead of TV setup, go to next. It's actually ridiculous. This shouldn't even be here. Go next, and then go through these patterns. And this is the checkerboard. You're not going to be able to see it here, but what's good about this is you're able to change these very similar to how you do in-game. So you're going to literally check them, make them brighter, make them darker by just using the directional. And what you're saying here is like the screen determines the darkest visible details on the TV. For some reason, with that update, the raised blacks on the LG made it unrecognizable for me. Now, when you see in the video me calling this calibration, it's not a calibration video. Simply because I'm not a calibrator. We're just using the HDR game calibration thing. But again, next, come in here, and then you're using the directional. Why the directional is important is you're not actually changing the settings on the LG. Meaning, changing luminance on the LG is only going to wash out the image. You need that to be done on the Xbox, and it's important. So, you know, it's a little bit sensitive. That's barely visible for me. It's very black for you guys, but we'll move on to the next one. And then you're seeing here, screen determines the brightest visible. So you're looking at contrast ratio right off the bat. Go darker until it pops up, and then go until they disappear. Next, darker until they go, and then until they disappear. Next, and then you're going to see the differences between the two images. Now, if you look, the image on the left is slightly more detail on the clouds, but to me, it was really more about what I finally saw in game. And what's weird about it, you see that banding and all that stuff is gone. Now, that little halo you see on the screen in between the two scenes is the back of my camera. So get out of that. I'm going to go back into the game. So now we're back in game. That's where these settings are actually important. Meaning the ones in game. You know, your sliders, barely visible, visible. Now, what I find is before using the calibration tool of the actual Xbox, there wasn't much change in this. It was almost like the Xbox was set to be too high. So, depending on what you want to see, you know, not visible, barely visible. I like things on the dark side, especially with OLEDs. So I'm taking this way down, but about there is where most of you are still going to like it. Head down here to your contrast or your white balance. Where is it? There we go. Lighten that a little bit. Or paper white, whatever you guys want to call it. And there you are. And then this pops. But without these steps, for me, all this looked good still, but it looked like a washed out kind of LED. And now that HDR is bumping. And so is the detail. That's what contrast adds, is this little, excuse me, sweetheart, is this detail. And again, if you want to go into the settings here and you feel like that's crushing a little bit, that's where you'll make the change in here. Oops, sorry, wrong way. And now it's a bit brighter. But that is absolutely gorgeous. So this video is basically for those of you that plug in your CX and you're missing a lot of detail and you're not feeling that OLED look. And again, normally I don't have to use that calibration menu. But for the CX, after it took the updates, I'm still waiting on some others. I really needed that to make a difference. Now quickly, what settings am I using on the actual LG? They're very generic. I'm in game mode. Now again, it's totally subjective on how you want to use the settings. Again, being in game mode, OLED light is 100, contrast is 100. Brightness is 50. Now, for those of you struggling with Dolby Vision, it is recommended if you're having raised blacks to drop this to 49. It doesn't change the brightness much at all in terms of making it too dark, but that helps. Sharpness I have at 10. Color I have at 55. Tint at 0. And these are kind of the same settings that Brass Tacks and I were both using. And I always go all the way out like a moron. Let's try that again. Now it's funny too with advanced controls, dynamic contrast. I don't love dynamic contrast on all the time with LEDs. However, I do like the way it looks at times on OLEDs. It does give it a more vibrant look. And you can see here what it does. Get out of the way, Jesus. Let's see if we can get over here again. I mean, it brightens that image. And then off is much deeper. But if you need a little more punch, dynamic contrast doesn't seem to mess with the aliasing or creating noise like in a lot of LEDs. So if you feel like it needs more vibrancy, go ahead and use that. On my LED, sometimes I'd rock dynamic contrast on low. Dynamic tone mapping I do leave on. HIG is not doesn't have many games that utilize it, but dynamic tone mapping for me off, then the image gets very dark. And it's still fine. Again, I would go back into the settings and redo them, but for me, I do like dynamic tone mapping on. HGIG doesn't do anything. So going back and forth, I think there's only 2 games that actually utilize it. So for me, dynamic tone mapping is on. Got so many remotes in my hands. Super resolution to me is a lot like reality creation. From Sony, some people say that on large displays to turn this on. I don't notice it doing much of anything, to be honest, but I don't have any blurriness. This image is very sharp, even at 77, so I'll leave that off. Color gamut, for me, I don't see any difference when HDR is enabled. So for me, I'll always leave it on wide. But on some titles, you will see more pop or more color. And white balance, which is the big one here, is warm. OLEDs get very, very blue, especially on camera. Warm 3 is the most accurate. It's just a little too warm for me, so I tend to either do medium or warm 1. And that's really it, guys. I mean, that's really all there is to the settings that I use. Where did I leave off? Yeah. Oh, and also here, black level, I do have it auto. You will have to mess with this on PC. If you do see that the game looks washed out at all, you will have to put this on low to get these kinds of effects. So be mindful that we'll do that on a PC one. And also, if you want to put the panel itself into PC, it's a whole different thing. But motion, I keep all this stuff disabled. And those are basically the settings. But I love the way it looks. And this is what I signed up for. This is a quiet setting. You can look at the couple videos before and see how the A9S did with this. This is one of my favorite levels in the game for specular highlights. Reminds me a lot of Uncharted 4 when he's a little kid. And that looks absolutely amazing.
It wasn't. I got a lot of happy memories at this place.
Wish I could say the same.
Now the camera is about 4.5 feet from the screen.
So how was he able to get permission to live outside his settlement?
Easy. Who's gonna tell him no?
I have no problems with... It just seemed like even having it on that just scan was causing some issue with motion.
Katie, come on. We should get inside.
Let's find out if he's going to help us or not.
Absolutely gorgeous. This is Gears 5. Now in this game, this was definitely one of those moments on all panels that I looked at and was like, oh my gosh, this looks incredible. And again, you can check my previous videos to see how other displays look like with this game. But let's go into the options for this title and see what the video options are. And I bet you I can actually lower. Oh, this is... I'm not a huge fan of this calibration, to be honest. Like the sliders that say, you know, make it barely disappear kind of thing. But that's Gears 5. I will say OLEDs do tend to struggle with smoke. But this does look fantastic. And probably could benefit with a little bit of a cooler temperature. But there's nothing about the fire here that is too dim. Forza Horizon 4 is one of my favorite looking games on the Xbox, and this wasn't looking good prior to that calibration tool that we used from the Xbox menu. Get the white point up till it disappears. HDR brightness. Now this is where I do like things to be darker, because you can tell as we are here, you can see the one, well you can't see it as well, but the one is visible. It's not visible now, a little bit, barely visible there for many people. It looks all black on the screen, I understand that. I like it darker, especially in this first level, but we'll leave it brighter for you guys. Because I'm going to hear Black Crush in the comments constantly, but that's not what I'm seeing at home. But let's rock it. Now to me, the PC version of this game looks much better. I just hit my camera, so I'll have to readjust that. But it didn't look anything like this until I messed with the HDR calibration tool in the menu.
Where you can be whatever you want to be.
Now the winter part's gonna pull blue because I'm not in warm 3, but that's okay. Now this can be downloaded in the Xbox menu, just the Forza demo. Crash. You see the sky anyway. I was playing it before even a little bit darker than this, because all of this pops so nicely. Now again, you're 4 feet from a 77-inch OLED, and it looks this clean. But it's definitely going to struggle out of the box, especially with Xbox. What I love about this demo is it does go through all the seasons. And this level for me with LEDs was really problematic, is I would see what we call jail bars, which is in between the zones. You'd see banding. And it's so nice not to have that now. It's like here as you would turn in the sky box, you would see banding. Now on the camera you're seeing vignetting, that's in-game. The sky looks amazing. And I'm telling you guys, messing around with it out of the box, even though I'm familiar with the CX and actually have another one, after that update I was ready to send it back. That's how frustrated I was with it. Which is why I've been kind of behind in the comments. But if this video helps any of you to, even though it's common sense, I wasn't using that calibration tool all the time. And definitely use it in between TVs. I switch out TVs every couple days for testing. Whoa. Let's rewind that real quick, like. Forgive the lack of editing. Let's go. Slow it down. But what I was seeing is I didn't have that, if you look at the clouds, I wasn't seeing that color. So if you do have a CX and it is washed out at all, try doing that. I know the PS4 has something similar very early when you start it with a new panel. Sometimes it doesn't come up when you put in a new panel. It didn't with the CX because I think it was recognizing the CX from before. Now this demo is one of my favorite videos or demos in any game. And this looked tremendous on the Master Series. But it looks phenomenal here. Just the different colors. And again, by messing with the HDR calibration tool, what's been great is now the sliders in-game do make a big difference. Again, keep an eye on the sky. Now I mentioned that with the C9, the C8, and the CX, always love their image quality, but it's not an out-of-the-box display. It does have to be messed with a little bit. And when all is said and done, I may actually have this display brought into Value Electronics, or I might have Jonathan from Value Electronics come here and actually calibrate it. Once the display is kind of done getting all the updates. Love the music in this game too, actually. Now you're gonna see more content from me every day during our time off or the pandemic. you know, everyone was a little all over the place, including myself. Having all these different TVs, you almost don't know where to start at times. But we're gonna get back into live streams. But look at that sky. And like I said, I even like to have it darker than this in the in-game settings. Being somebody coming from a plasma, just the contrast ratio is what I do appreciate. But I'm telling you, I was very close to putting this back in the box, pulling the 900E down, and either grabbing the Z8H at 8K, or, you know, waiting, you know, another year. But I feel totally different about it now. But the idea is not to know or pretend I know more than you guys. The idea is to share little discoveries together. Again, shout out to Brass Tacks, who did that with his when he first got it, and I neglected to do that. Again, the original CX didn't need it. Now, in closing, showing a little Call of Duty Modern Warfare multiplayer. The black level is so important. Once that is compromised, OLED just loses its value. So try to make sure that you check that calibration tool when setting up your CX. You know, like I mentioned before, mine didn't have any of the issues with the 55-inch. It was just with the after the update, which my other display didn't have. Let's see the skybox. Looks fantastic. Now there is some banding still on the panel, but again, I was told to give it, you know, 100, 200 hours, and I don't use my panels enough, but I don't really have a time limit on if it has to go back or not. It struggles with smoke a little bit. But definitely look to use that tool. I'm not one to be giving settings. Like I mentioned, there is no calibration equipment, and you cannot calibrate without equipment. But it was a little bit of an overview of what the settings are and how I'm using them right now. But definitely give that HDR calibration tool a look. And now I'm seeing this panel with new eyes. I got shot right in the eye. Alright guys, I am Brian at Whisper Status 74. We will be doing the same thing for the Sony A9S, the Sony 950H, the TCL R635, and that's all I got. Yeah, that's all I have right now. But hope everybody's doing well. Love you guys. I will see you in the comments. Again, special thank you to Brass Tacks. And I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.